Well, welcome all to our fifth Zoom meeting. It's good to see you all. We've got truly a jam-packed day, and I would say we are not easing to the finish line. We've just got a lot of great information both today and tomorrow, and hopefully some useful ideas to bring back to your state. So next slide, just a quick reminder of where we've been so far. We've worked our way out now to the third and final ring of this model. So we're talking about local and state systems. So today, financing and funding of early childhood, and then buckle up, tomorrow we're going to have some discussions to think about systems and organization change. So the next slide was really hard for me to create because you all had a lot of great information to share. So this is just a taste of some of the stuff that was put into Thinkific. So as you remember, at the beginning of the program, we asked what were some of the things you wanted to get from the program? And then at the conclusion of the chapters, we asked you to reflect and share an aha moment or something you wanted to learn more about. I want to say that what we saw was a handful of sort of common comments that you all had to say. And so some of the biggest takeaways that resonated were really around maternal and birth outcomes. And also a handful of you noted that what you really appreciated was sort of this coursework helped you expand your thinking of what early childhood is. So being a bit more holistic and thinking about the effects of housing and financial instability. So that seemed like that was an eye-opening comment or opportunity for a handful of you. We also saw that the flexible dollars within ARPA was an interesting point that came up mentioned by a few of you, excuse me. And also just a question of where the money is being allocated right now. Two other quick things I want to call out. It really stood out that learning about some state examples was helpful. So Reading Corps in Minnesota in chapter 2, a handful of you mentioned, and then also in Virginia during our Zoom 3 on childcare, talking about retention and compensation of their early childhood teachers. And the last thing that really stood out to a handful of you was around the early childhood educators. And so many of you echoed professionalizing the field and better compensation for those in it. So with that next slide, with that short recap, what we're going to do now is have Riley divide us up randomly into some small groups. We're going to be in those rooms for about 15 minutes. And really the goal is just to network and chit chat with folks. So if you did something great this summer you want to share about, feel free. We know that students are getting ready to head back to the classrooms right now. So if you had a favorite teacher that you want to mention, or perhaps if you ever got detention, share what you did that got you that detention. But really in the end, just be social and hopefully meet some new people that you haven't had a chance to interact with. After 15 minutes, we'll come back here. We're going to show the leaderboard and highlight our top 5 point earners so far. And we have some more trivia coming at you so you can accrue a few more points.
Now we're going to get started. And as Allison also mentioned, we're going to take a look at our points leaderboard. So do not fret if you are not on here. There is still lots of opportunity to move up. But what we're looking at right now, let me get my slide to advance. Here are our top 5. So, congratulations. Thank you so much to everyone for keeping up with the work. We know it's a lot. We really do try to be thoughtful about what information we put in there. We want it to be useful to you, but we realize it is a lot of work as well. So thank you all so much for all of your time and dedication to spending all that time on Thinkific. These are our top 5 out of 128 points total right now. But as I mentioned, there's a close race right behind this and anybody can move around. So no worries if you're not up here, you still can get up here. And you're earning points right now, right? You logged in, you're with us. That's 5 points for being here today. You're going to earn another 5 points tomorrow. And another way to earn points is through trivia. So let's do that. It's trivia time. So I would like for whoever has the correct answer to this next question to just let us know. We're going to take the first person with the correct answer. So you can put it in the chat. You can do it however you'd like, but I think it's probably going to be the fastest and the easiest if you unmute yourself if you know the answer. So without further ado, the Federal Reserve is a central bank. While its home is in Washington, D.C., it's composed of regional banks throughout the country. How many regional banks are there? That's your question. So anybody with the correct answer or a guess, feel free to unmute. Just let us know what you think.
Don't be shy, it's just a guess.
Shot in the dark.
5.
This is James Tipton here. I know there's one in Atlanta, so I'm going to take an educated guess and say 4.
Okay, we got 4. I heard 5. What other guesses do we have?
12.
Nine.
Hawaii says 12.
Oh, Senator got it. It is 12. Congratulations. You just earned yourself a trivia point. So we'll make sure that we record that for you. And yeah, so 12 regional banks as well as the national bank in DC. So with that, we're going to get into our content. I'm going to pass things along to Allison to present our speakers.
Thanks, Melissa. Yes, I'm glad we started to talk a little bit about money, which we're going to continue doing. I'll give you a heads up that our next trivia question later today is also going to be related to money. So on with the show, I'm really excited to introduce you all to 2 experts from the Children's Funding Project. We have Kylie Wheeler, a project manager, and Kate Ritter, an early childhood advisor, here with us today. Jenny's going to share a link to read their full bios if you're interested, but we're going to sort of build on what was learned a bit during the crash course on Thinkific. And so these 2 women are going to lead us in conversations around short and long-term funding goals, how this unprecedented infusion of federal funds might be leveraged. We're also going to talk about a fiscal map and a cost model and how these are helpful tools that might be used in your state. And we'll have some interactivity, we'll have a poll, an opportunity to really put paper to pen and start thinking through what you might want to do in your state. And of course, time for questions and answers. These are both wonderful resources, and a handful of their staff are on the line also. So use this opportunity. If you have questions, be sure to ask and get them answered. And with that, Melissa will stop sharing, and I'm going to turn it over to Kate and Kylie.
Thanks so much, Allison. And I'm going to, first of all, adjust my camera and share my screen. Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the country. Kate and I are so thrilled to be here with you and to talk a little bit about COVID relief funding, which I think we've all been talking and hearing a lot about recently, and strategic financing for early care and education at the state level, and importantly, how those things can fit together. So a little bit about us, and again, some of this first section may feel a little repetitive if you did watch the crash course on Thinkific, but you know, we did want to make sure that we solidly recapped the COVID funding piece because it is one of those things that sometimes you need to hear a few times to really grasp them and to you know, begin to think creatively about how to use the funding. But I will also just take a quick moment to introduce our organization. We are the Children's Funding Project, and we help communities, states and communities fill gaps and ensure equitable opportunities for kids through strategic public financing, which we're talking about today. And I think I may have said this in the crash course, but you know, for a long time, our bread and butter, the thing we were working toward most aggressively was, and to some extent still is, generating new revenue at the local level for children and youth. But in the last year and a half, we really recognized the need to support states and communities as they navigate this real, I mean, it's an inundation of new funding. And as they as they make plans to, move beyond the American Rescue Plan, move beyond the CARES Act, and really progress into an era of equitable recovery after the pandemic, ensuring that our kids, in an ideal world, see a gain a few years down the road because of the work that states and communities do by leveraging this money. So that is just a little bit about us and why we care about this topic. But yes, so this part is really just a recap of the crash course content, but also it is throughout, we're also going to be referring to a resource that we've created for each of your states that lays out the ARPA funding coming to your state at the state level, as well as to all of your localities, school districts, and higher ed institutions. Yeah, so we're gonna learn a little bit about how to navigate those resources as we go. So here we go. All right, so just to put things in perspective and remind everyone of what a year and a half it has been, this is a timeline of COVID relief and federal COVID relief that has come down since the federal public health emergency was declared on January 27th, 2020. And, I think our first kind of unprecedented moment in child and youth policy was the passage of the CARES Act, which saw, nearly 60 billion in funding that is available to be used flexibly for children. That was a very exciting time. And then we had some smaller bills go through. And then, at the end of 2020, we got quite a bit of money for childcare and education through the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, the federal level. But what we're really talking about these days is the American Rescue Plan Act, which was passed in March of this year. And it includes a truly unprecedented, roughly $210 billion that can be used flexibly for children and youth. And I will say these what's in it for kids numbers are slightly subjective. They include funding in some cases that we believe, can and should be used for children. So I just wanted to add that as a caveat. And this is some of the same information, just displayed a little bit differently. It shows the individual funding streams, not all, but most, that have received some kind of supplemental funding from federal COVID relief in the past year and a half, across service types. And of course, today we are focusing in right here on early care and education, and just making sure that we are zooming in there. And likewise, in this first column here, we are highlighting the American Rescue Plan funding that is directly related to early care, early education. But, something that we as an organization have been really aggressive about trying to communicate is that when we're talking about young children and the funding that is in the American Rescue Plan, we are not just talking about this column right here. There are opportunities to support our youngest kids and their families across these columns. So, today we're going to emphasize, where we see the greatest opportunity for flexibility. And that happens to be within, of course, the childcare dollars, but also within the education dollars, and then importantly, particularly for you all, the direct state and local relief coming down through the coronavirus local fiscal recovery funds. So just diving right into childcare. So this really just shows how childcare supplemental funding, emergency response funding, importantly, has stacked up since the CARES Act, when we first got that infusion of money into CCDBG, all the way to the American Rescue Plan, which finally got us to, between that and the December Appropriations Act, finally got us to that $50 billion that advocates have been calling for childcare, but we know that that is still not enough. So with our first little foray into our fact sheets, I will, let me see, I will ask, I think, Jenny to put the link to the fact sheets in the chat. Perfect. And I will do a new screen share here to just help us all walk through an example of childcare funding. So give me just one moment. New share, please. Okay. So here we are on the main tab of this resource. And right away, I'm gonna go down to 75% just to make it a little easier to see. And there's a little tool in the main tab that allows you to get a quick view of all states across these three main buckets of childcare, fiscal recovery, and education, if you're curious about what others are receiving. But if not, you can click directly to your custom fact sheet. And just because they're first on the list, I'm going to go right to Alabama. And you will find, since we're starting here with childcare funding, I don't expand my screen anymore. Since we're starting here with childcare funding, you can see the totals for childcare stabilization and the supplemental discretionary funding for your CCDF, CCDBG, as well as who we understand to be the key decision maker for those funds. And so it's actually probably a great time to say, as you were looking at this key decision maker column, please let us know if there's actually a better point of contact or a more relevant decision maker that we have not identified. That we are open to your feedback. And then here you'll see some of the eligible uses for the childcare funding. And we're going to go a little bit more into those in just a bit, but that is just a nice little overview, as well as the key federal deadlines, so your obligation and liquidation deadlines. So this is the childcare funding is the only piece of funding on your fact sheet that does not have a local component, only because there is so much variation in how our subsidy programs are run and administered across the country. So again, we are open to suggestions on capturing that information locally, but we aren't quite there yet. Does anybody have any initial questions about this document? We're going to be returning to it time and time again, but I just want to pause for questions. All right.
Kylie, can you explain the part underneath the local part, or do you want to get into that later?
I'm gonna, when we get to the education and fiscal recovery, I'm gonna return to the local components. Yeah, thank you. All right. So now you know how much childcare money your state is receiving. And this was part of the the crash course, but I just want to emphasize, in addition to the, so for the childcare stabilization funds, first of all, through the American Rescue Plan, this is the pot of money for childcare that is almost entirely intended to support providers. So 90% of these funds must go to providers in the form of stabilization grants, as it says, but there is a fair amount of flexibility within that 10%. And we just want to elevate that as we go along. And you can see some of the ways that you can use that 10% in a somewhat innovative way here. And then some more specific uses for childcare stabilization. So some of the things you can do with the funds that aren't simply to, provide stabilization grants to providers, using that 10%. Well, so first of all, you can use some of this funding for wage bonuses and wage supplements. You can use some of this funding for enhancing mental health supports for young children and their families, as well as for providers. And then some additional ways to use that 10% that isn't subject to the requirements of the 90%. You can raise provider rates. You can start or enhance a family childcare network. And you can, importantly, support and incentivize pathways to moving your family, friend, and neighbor care, unlicensed, unregulated care, to regulation and to licensing. So that is important to know as you think about those funds. And for the supplemental childcare funding, so this is the discretionary CCDF funding that is coming down. I encourage you to go to this link, which I will put in the chat, or if Jenny could put in the chat. It is a fantastic paper that we will be referring back to multiple times today. Yeah.
I'm sorry. When you're done, it looks like Senator Miss Lucia does have a question for you. I don't know.
Fantastic.
Would you like me to ask the question now or later?
Now is great.
Okay, so quick one. I know you had talked about how 90% of the funding for that particular segment is allocated for childcare providers, and we are struggling. And I'm not sure if any of the other states are also as well. And I'd like to ask your opinion as to how we can go around the fact that some of these childcare providers may not necessarily have their business paperwork in order, whether it be like state taxes, they can't get tax clearance, or unfortunately, these are the ones that really need it most. And we are cognizant of the fact that, we have to abide by those, financial considerations and clearances. But how do we get it to them, to who need it the most?
That's a wonderful question. And it's a challenging one. In my opinion, your answer lies within the 10%. So if you put a somewhat significant portion of that set aside toward, I don't know if this is the right term for exactly what you're talking about, but for community navigator program, or some combination of specialists to guide folks who need that extra support through the process, and simply marketing that these new dollars are available. That is going to be your best bet. I also, and I'm not entirely sure about like the explicit allowability of, using some of your CCDF discretionary funds to put toward the same those same causes, or those same types of connector programs, and publicizing the need. But what that doesn't get at is the issue of the fact that some of these people aren't going to be able to fill out the paperwork and aren't going to be able to get things in order so that they are eligible for these grants. So I'd like to follow up on that portion of the question, because I know that there are some slightly waived, some requirements that are going to be, that are not quite as strict within the discretionary funds, that may allow for some wiggle room in terms of eligibility, but definitely an important concern.
Kylie, I put my contact info in the chat.
Thank you.
If anyone else has ideas or something that they're doing within their state, please let us know, because we're struggling with that in Hawaii.
Mhm.
Can I just add?
And I don't know if folks
Senator-
saw what Elizabeth put in the chat, which is a really good point about you can use funding to create shared services models, which part of those can include business supports for providers that need help with, creating budgets and the paperwork that goes along with some of those programs.
Elizabeth, could you share your contact in, or maybe I'll just pick it up from the website, and yeah, I'll follow up with you, Elizabeth. Thank you. Go ahead. Sorry, Kylie, I didn't mean to.
No, that was a wonderful question. Thank you. And I'm curious about other people's.
I was just going to add, Kylie, too, that Senator Mislish, if you remember, maybe bring it up tomorrow as well. We'll be talking with the Commissioner of Early Childhood from Connecticut, who will be sort of talking about like systems issues. And so that might be,
Will do.
she could speak to as well.
Thank you.
And then I also popped in the chat that just as a reminder, we have the listserv for the fellows. So if you do want to send out an email to every other fellow, you can do that through the listserv. That's in the chat.
Excellent. Okay. So, just breezing through childcare. I want to make sure I don't go over time. I brought up some of these key considerations, these key partnerships during the crash course, but I think they're worth mentioning again. So in particular, how can you find ways to use things like the 10% of your child care stabilization funds, or a portion of the 10%, to make those systemic improvements. And again, I encourage you, in addition to whatever you learn through the resources that were just shared, I do encourage you to check out that paper and its section on these, both the discretionary funds and the stabilization funds, because there are some creative ideas for making small but impactful improvements in the system using the child care dollars. And then something that is going to be super important for today is just considering your key partners in leveraging, understanding, and sustaining the gains of these funding streams. So in the case of childcare, of course, your state lead agency, your resource and referral organizations, whatever that looks like in your state, any coordinating bodies that are focused on children and youth, or specifically young children. Those can include local dedicated funds, children's cabinets, etc. And then, as Elizabeth mentioned, utilizing your shared services networks to get the word out and provide that connective tissue that you need to make the most of these funds. And I feel like I am going, I'm kind of breezing through, but I just want to make sure we get to the actual discussion. quick pivot to the education funding, or the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, ESSER 3, as we call it for ARPA. And this is something that we touched on the during the crash course. This is your K-12 money, and most of it is going to school districts. And for school districts, they must use 20% of whatever they receive for learning recovery strategies. And those are the high points. But what is important to talk about today, this is what it actually looks like in the city where I live. But, well, let me see. Don't want to go to the fact sheet just yet. I would love to talk a little bit about some ways that you can use ESSER funding for early learning in some capacity. The options are limited, but they are there. So one thing that's been suggested is functionally adding slots for childcare and for infants and toddlers even, by improving existing facilities. So basically creating more space for slots. And then it's also important to mention that any activity allowable under a series of laws, but including IDEA, parts B and C, is an eligible use for ESSER funds. So for example, here, since we can, fund early childhood mental health consultants using, I believe it's IDEA Part B, you can use ESSER funds to do that too. So it's just an important reminder that there are opportunities. And then just a note here, you can go to your state's ESSER plan. Every state has had to make a plan and get it approved to learn how your state is planning to use ESSER funds for early care and education, if at all. And that is a better segue to back to the fact sheet. So we're back in Alabama. Everything under this line here is funding that is landing locally. And we're gonna hop right down to the purple here to look at the education funding, or specifically the ESSER 3 funding that is coming to school districts in Alabama. So to see the full list, you're gonna click on this to the left. And these are all the school districts in Alabama that are receiving an ESSER allocation, their allocation, and the estimated 20% minimum that they must use for learning recovery. And then some resources here, some tips for using this money for early learning. But then, as I mentioned, where available, it also includes a link to your state's ESSER plan, which is really going to be the bedrock of what your Department of Education or relevant agency is going to be doing over the next few years using these funds. Yeah, and then to save some space, we will click that. Let me see. I want a new share, please. Okay, should be. Then there are just some points of key timing that we got into in the crash course that you can revisit anytime. And then again, just some of these key considerations. Like I said, learning more about how early childhood figures into your state's ESSER plan. Considering, through collaboration with your state Department of Education, do your local school districts have the administrative capacity to handle this funding? Many don't. because again, it's fairly unprecedented. So how can you facilitate increasing the capacity for those school districts? And again, those key partners, your state education agencies, your school districts, your after school providers, a little bit less relevant for you all in this moment, collective impact groups, and then most importantly, families. As we're talking about early learning, something I remind myself of frequently is that, all little kids live in a family, and, they likely have siblings that are going to be affected significantly by funding that doesn't necessarily apply to them, but it does figure into the, that whole child. So just a reminder there. Okay, we're going to skip over this for time, but if you're interested, this is just something we talked about during the crash course, but some examples of how localities got really innovative in supporting early learning using their CARES Act Coronavirus Relief Fund dollars. And this is our transition into the direct state and local relief. So for the CARES Act, it was the Coronavirus Relief Fund. For the American Rescue Plan, it's our state and local coronavirus fiscal recovery funds. These funds are far more flexible, have a much longer window to spend, and there are some really great opportunities for using them to support young children. So going right back to your fact sheet, maybe I can.
Kylie, there's one little challenge happening, and I thought I could solve for it because I was able to expand a second ago, but folks are trying to hit the plus button and it's not working. It's saying it's protected. So we might have to do that later for people.
Oh yeah.
Unless there's
I'll
something
just
so super
unprotect.
Easy that you can do right this second.
Yeah, no, I could just unprotect all of these sheets, and I will. Maybe when I pass things over to Kate.
Yeah, let's do that.
But for now, sorry about that. For now, I just when you can go to the green here, and you can find your all of the direct allocations of local fiscal recovery money coming to cities and counties in your state. And I say direct because in most cases we only have the allocations for metropolitan cities and counties coming directly from the federal government, not the state pass-throughs that are going to be going to your smaller cities and towns. But we hope to be adding that information in the future. And yeah, so that's where you can find that. Elizabeth, thank you for flagging the issue.
And Kylie, one other question that I do think is important. Are these fact sheets considered public info? Can folks on the line share it with anyone, or is it just for them?
Oh my gosh. So yeah, this is all public information. And it is, it is yours to own. And honestly, yours to edit and reformat it. Basically do with the information what you need to do, and use it however it'll be most helpful. Yeah, thank you. So then coming to the end here of part one, just want to reemphasize CARES Act funds were, particularly coronavirus relief funds, were meant to respond to the emergency. The American Rescue Plan State and Local Fiscal Recovery is intended to support equitable recovery. And those are very, very different things. So we're thinking about these funds in a much longer term, much more system improvement oriented way than I think we have for other relief funds recently. So just want to put that here. And then I believe we touched on this in the course, but just some of the ways that you can explicitly use that are explicitly allowable uses that are related to early learning with the fiscal recovery funds. So expanding childcare, expanding home visiting programs, and of course, enhancing services for children and families who are involved in the foster care system, or have other similar situations. Basically, anybody in your state who can reasonably be considered disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. This money can be used to support their longer term recovery and importantly, supporting better, more equitable outcomes. So important. And again, I will refer you directly to the Build Initiatives paper. They've just done a fantastic job of really laying out all of the possibilities for infants and toddlers using this funding. And also you will be referring to, I think, likely referring to that paper in your breakout sessions today as you consider some ways to match funding to priorities. So some key considerations with the fiscal recovery, we know that this has been a tough economic time for states and localities. You will have less flexibility and less money to spend if your state experienced a relatively large budget shortfall as a result of the pandemic. So that is something that we are certainly sensitive to. And then key partnerships. There are a lot of opportunities built into the guidance for fiscal recovery for collaboration between state and local government, as well as local and regional intermediaries, backbone organizations that can help support the successful coordination and administration of funds. So ensuring that you can take advantage of that. So in closing for this section, we feel really strongly that, again, it's going to be so important to be intentional with these funds and to use them in a way that encourages longer term system improvements and it really sets the stage for years of growth and new revenue, and sets a standard for how we care for our young children. So just some of the ways to do that: investing in your coordinating bodies, treating funds as a down payment on longer term goals, collaborating and coordinating across systems, like we just talked about, and then ensuring that you are documenting your actions, your results, and your challenges and your successes as you use these funds creatively. So I will pause here for questions. That might have been a fire hose experience, but
Kylie, real fast, are we doing a poll question now? Because if not, we're a little behind on time. So I wonder if there's a burning question, we could take it, but otherwise just sort of turn it over to Kate and keep going. What do you think?
That sounds great to me. Yeah. We do have, let's see. Okay. And how behind, oh, it looks like Representative Vargas has a question.
Yeah, sorry, a kind of broad question here.
Yeah.
Obviously, the timeline for using these funds is limited, right? And so do you have recommendations as to how we can maximize these funds to actually build sort of sustainable systems? I think this is great for capital, great for, immediate needs that we have in the community that need to be met. But in terms of creating sustainable systems, Any recommendations on that would be great.
That's a great question. And Elizabeth, I feel like you are best positioned to answer this question.
Well, I mean, I do think you're going to get into this when we talk about whatever you do, you need to get into thinking about a strategic financing plan. So having a 2-year, 4-year, 6-year plan for, what this is going to look like. So don't just do stuff, right, with the money, but know sort of where it fits in your long range plan and where you're going to generate revenue down the road too, because we just know that the true cost of providing early childhood services has been an elephant in the room for a long time, and we have to start addressing it. So this is a nice down payment, but then, and we hope that more will come from the federal level, but there's also going to be state and local skin in the game that has to be, attended to. So.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Okay, so, basically speaking to that exact question, how do we structure this so that we sustain the gain that we make with these funds? So we are thinking about it through the lens of strategic financing. And that is what we're working with states and communities to do. And for us, a strategic financing plan for a state includes a few components. So first of all, it's important that we have a really clear list of priorities and strategic priorities that you can put a price tag on in order to make a good strategic financing plan. So that's one. But once you have that, we look for three major components, or we work toward three major components. That would be current investment in your priorities. So what's already being spent by whom? The actual cost of achieving your goals. What will it cost to expand access or increase affordability? And then finally, assessing the new revenue sources that may be available to fill that gap once we've identified it. So we are going to focus today on two of our main ones, the two initial pieces, identifying the current investment and assessing the cost to fill the gap between true cost and current investment. And the way we typically do that is through fiscal mapping and cost modeling, respectively. So a fiscal map is our primary means of assessing current investment, and it is also known as a children's budget analysis, and it is also it's just a different way of looking at public and private investments. So typically we typically think of public budgets in a very department or agency centric way. What a fiscal map does is it translates that that's those same numbers, the same funding to usually an outcomes focused lens or a lens based on service types. And these outcomes and service types are almost always informed by some kind of strategic plan or set of strategic priorities. And then these are just some of the ways that a fiscal map can really help identify, help in this identification of the current investments. And I won't read them to you, but there's so much utility in creating a fiscal map to accomplish this first goal. So I'm actually going to pass it right over to Kate, and she's going to talk a little bit about cost modeling, or our primary method of assessing true cost of our goals and priorities.
Kylie, do you want to launch the poll? Because I thought we had talked about it as we move into this section, or the interest of time, should we not have the poll?
Do a poll, do a poll.
All right, ready? Launch the poll. Get your thinking cap on, and this relates to what we just
I can't hear. Hold on.
So we're asking you to select, does your state have a current early childhood financing strategic plan? Yes, no, maybe, or I don't know. And no wrong answer here. So we're just sort of curious as we continue the dialogue to see what's happening in your state.
Okay, should I continue going while folks fill out that poll?
Yeah, I think I would say based on who's on the line, I think we know our answer, and the better part of folks actually don't know if their state has one, which is fine. I think that this information will be just as helpful and interesting. So thank you all for participating. And yep, Kate, if you want to go right
That is,
ahead.
those
Well, and Allison,
results
it was
are
kind
interesting.
of a trick question because we just made up strategic finance planning not that long ago. So it wouldn't be shocking that no one really thought they had one.
Fair enough.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Kate Ritter. I apologize. I'm in rural Vermont where we have very rainy, stormy weather right now. So my internet is not very stable. So I have to turn my camera off, but that's my face. Hi. So I just wanted to give an overview of one of the other components that Kylie mentioned that we use in strategic financing, which is a cost model. And many people hear about cost models, but they're not entirely clear what it means. So for those that aren't clear, I just wanted to clarify, it's a way to measure the true cost of running a program or a system or a service. So at its most basic level, it's a framework in which every single expense related to an activity, such as for what we're talking about today, running an early learning program, all those expenses are recorded as well as the revenue. And that allows you to compare cost versus revenue for that program or activity. And cost models are built to be specific to the program or system, as well as whatever the specific goal is or what you want to learn from it. So for example, understanding the true cost of providing care for a particular age group or for a total program, understanding cost differences with different in childcare, what are QRIS levels or quality rating levels, cost differences in different regions of the state, for example, to account for different economies in, say, an urban area versus a rural area with a more depressed economy or costs. It can also look at costs based on type of care, such as centers or homes. The framework looks very different, of course, because a home childcare program looks very different from a center childcare program, which can also look very different from, say, a school-based preschool program. Or often it's used to understand the impact of increasing workforce compensation. And so we've been doing a lot of cost models, and currently many states and communities are using them to develop appropriate subsidy reimbursement rates that align with the cost of care. And I'll discuss a little more in a moment about how the cost of care differs from the market rate. And this is also becoming particularly common in places that have legislation to increase the minimum wage, and places that are seeking to make the case for the impact that the minimum wage increase will have on early childhood programs. Also, probably the most common use for it right now is places seeking to implement a salary scale for childcare teachers that's on par with school district teachers or with a state consensus wage scale. Or lastly, setting rates to improve care for certain populations or certain ages of children, like infants or toddlers that have more expensive forms of care. So as I said before, a cost model accounts for every component that goes into a program or service. And so this is often, you might hear it referred to as the ingredient model. And so we generally first set up a model using structural drivers of cost. These are things like program requirements. So that can be something like mandatory curriculum usage for a state preschool program, or staffing requirements like including family support specialists for Head Start programs. We include differences that may be related to geographical areas. So for example, transportation needs might need to be included in rural areas, as well as I mentioned before, incorporation of minimum wage requirements Those can also differ geographically. For example, a city might have a higher minimum wage than the state wage, which impacts the cost in those areas. So then we also look at implicit cost drivers, and those are things like ratios and group size. This has a big impact on cost. As we know, smaller ratios and group sizes for infants and toddlers makes that care more expensive. And that's a really critical cost driver in a model. We include all non-personnel costs, so everything from rent and utilities to food and education materials, anything that goes into the program that's non-personnel we include. And then most importantly, the biggest cost driver in early childhood programs, which is personnel, so wages and benefits. Those generally account for 60 to 70% of the cost of early childhood. So those are really critical. And overall, when creating a cost model, data is truly the most important component. The cost model is only as good as the data that goes into it. And because the tool is built to be specific to your state or community, the richer or more local your data, the more accurate the model is going to be, or the more closely it will reflect the reality of the program or service in your area. So often when we're asked to work with a place, we try to determine their level of readiness for this work. And a high level of readiness generally includes a strong relationship with data and budget holders. So having access to state data, that would make the cost model a more useful tool. Next slide. So, okay, right. So I mentioned before, the cost model is really critical in looking at the difference between market cost versus true cost. A cost model is a qualitative measurement, and we know that traditionally childcare funding or early childhood funding it's been chronically underfunded because it's been set through a market-based approach. And that really only tells us what families can afford to pay or what programs are charging, because it's what families in their community can enroll, the level that they can enroll at. So the average market cost ranges from $12,000 to $15,000 per year for a spot. On the flip side, with a cost model, we look at the true cost of care. So that's reflective of all the costs. And when you break it down, looking at all those pieces, the average true cost of care actually ranges from about $20,000 to $30,000 a year for a spot.
Thank you, Kate. So what does this all look like in practice? So we thought it could be really instructive to talk a little bit about some work that we did in some strategic finance planning work we did in and for the state of Wisconsin. So the Wisconsin Early Childhood Association came to us with the state's infant and toddler policy implementation plan, which is this like beautiful set of initiatives and priorities for supporting infants and toddlers broadly, everything from direct services to those workforce components for their early care and education workforce, et cetera. So they came to us with, here's what we want to do. Here are the things that we want to buy. How do we get there? So we walked them through the process that we just went through in some detail. And basically, we did a fiscal map to determine the current investment in the priorities that they laid out. And then Kate created a cost model that helped them determine and perform multiple gap analyses against the findings of the fiscal map, so that current investment piece, to assess, approximately how much would it cost to reach these goals. And then finally, and what we are not getting into today in any substantial way, is we helped them determine the best and most feasible potential options for generating new revenue at the state level, by way of a collaborative process with multiple stakeholders across multiple meetings. But again, we're focusing on identifying current investment and identifying the cost to fill the gap. And we already did our poll question, so I'm going to go right there. So this is what the process looked like. You'll see on the left those same components, the current investment, cost to fill the gap, and new revenue sources to fill the gap. And in the middle is I think where the interest is. What questions were we attempting to answer through this work? So firstly, for current investment, how much money, if any, is currently being invested in key parts of the strategic plan? When it comes to the cost, determining the cost to fill the gap, what will it cost to scale activities that are currently funded? And then what will it cost to start up, to implement new activities that are not yet funded, which are two very different things. And then in the far right column, the solutions were a targeted fiscal analysis and a cost modeling analysis. So briefly, the findings of the fiscal map, only 6 funding streams, not including private sources, which would be inclusive of parent pay, supported most of the infant and toddler focused activities in their strategic plan, in their implementation plan. Most of that investment was federal, which they were surprised by. And then we also, and it's important for this conversation, tracked the COVID relief money that was spent on young children from the CARES Act, which amounted to about $144 million during our period of analysis. And then Kate, I think, is going to talk a little bit about the cost model that got us to our findings.
Yeah, I'll make this, really brief, just so we can try and stay on track with time. The model that we built for Wisconsin was built for long-term use. We really wanted them to be able to use it in the now with what they were trying to do, as well as in the future as things change, as say compensation changes, as funding coming into the system changes, so that they can alter variable. We've included a lot of variables in the model, so that those could be changed so that it would have long-term use for the state, so that they could use it from right now. Their focus was on infants and toddlers. Maybe at some point they're going to want to catch up preschoolers, so that any of those variables can be changed. I can, I think you're right. We'll just do a screenshot of the tool rather than me walking you through the whole tool. Essentially what you see on your screen is what they wanted to see was what it costs per child per age group with current salaries, and they really wanted to improve the stability and the workforce for infants and toddlers, and doing that through increased compensation. So the table on the bottom has results with recommended salaries, and you can see the difference. Say for infants and toddlers, it's just under $20,000 per child. When you look at with recommended salaries, it's closer to $30,000. And you can also see how different that is as compared to the subsidy rate. We also looked at it as per classroom cost, so that the state could, if they wanted to in the future, move towards contracts for classrooms. And then on the left, you see those are all the variables that I was talking about, the things that are highlighted in green and orange. Those can be changed so that they can look at it by licensing standards versus a higher quality of like Head Start standards or a Young Star rating, which is their quality rating scale. They could change average fringe or benefits to recommended fringe or benefits. And it was also done by region of the state. So this is just an example of what one kind of cost model can do to look at, you know, their goal was infants and toddlers and compensation.
Thank you, Kate. So finally, what we were able to learn from this analysis and from these components, we were able to determine that the true cost of care for all infants and toddlers in Wisconsin is about 251 million. And
I think if there are specific lingering questions, even after today, we can make sure to make some connections that would be helpful. And maybe Kylie would even consider doing a one-off office hour where we could just have her maybe for 60 minutes, that if people want to come back to sort of talk more about what they're thinking, short and long term, we might be able to make that happen. So just keep that in your mind.
Absolutely. We are definitely available for that. And, you know, I think just in the interest of time in this part 4, as we talk about, you know, these state examples, I want to do them there. Now I'm wasting time just talking. I want to do them. I want to give enough attention to those things. So if we need to do something separately to spend more time here, we can absolutely do that, at least on our end. So in the interest of time, do we want to report back on takeaways, or do we want to just proceed to part 4?
I'm a Pisces and true to my sign that sometimes making decisions is difficult. So Jenny, Melissa, do you guys want some report out, or should we just keep moving along?
I think if anyone has a question, feel free more, you know, to ask that, but then I would think maybe we could move on and then come back to anything, any other thoughts or share outs later as well.
Sure. So burning questions. I guess that's what I heard from that. If anyone has a burning question. All right. I think with that, Kylie, you're good. Sorry, move on to part 4.
Fantastic. So this is where I am going to bring in the expertise of our executive director, Elizabeth, in a few places, because we just wanted to offer some examples of what states are doing currently to bridge those funding gaps, you know, things they were doing before, during, and before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and what they're planning to do with this funding. So Elizabeth, are you still in line? Would you be able to speak to Louisiana?
Sure. I would just say, and hi everyone, I've been piping in here. I would just say that I've been really impressed with the team in Louisiana that we've been working with. It includes advocates, but it also includes their Department of Education staff and their legislature. And they've put a commission together, which everybody kind of rolls their eyes and goes, oh, great, another commission, right? But what this commission has been able to do is really dive into, they started off thinking about some of those cost elements and some of the functionality of their early childhood system. And the early tendency was to sort of geek out and think about what a perfect system might look like. But what we were able to really do is pivot them to thinking about, if we ever want to get there, how much money do we need, and what are the revenue options before us in our given state context, right? And so they've really been sort of tackling head on some of these revenue questions, and they've got sort of a short-term, mid-term, and long-term plan that they've put together to say, you know, we're going to go after sports betting right now because it's, you know, live and on the table, and we're going to get, you know, a portion of that cordoned off for early childhood. But we're also going to expand into longer term thinking and come up with some ways to generate revenue here in our state to do the things we know need to happen. Because at the time when they put this commission together, they had 7% of infants and toddlers were in some sort of a quality care setting, which, you know, is just not where we need to be in this country at this point. So they recognized that and rolled up their sleeves and started working on revenue strategies. Is that what you wanted to know, Kylie?
Yes, exactly. And really, we're offering these examples just to reemphasize that there are so many ways to go about this. There are so many paths to achieving the goals that may feel super aspirational right now. So we just wanted to offer a few or a couple key examples. The next being the state of Washington, and I may have Kate speak briefly to this, but it might be more. It might make more sense, not to put anyone on the spot, but if the senator from Washington wanted to say a few words about the Fair Start for Kids Act in Washington and how that's come about.
Maybe someday they'll call me the senator from Washington, but right now I'm just the senator from the 32nd district.
That's fair. That's fair.
I can't see myself on the screen. Am I showing up okay?
Yep,
Yep.
we can see you.
Good. So the Fair Start Act, and I'd say most of the credit on the Senate side goes to Senator Wilson, Claire Wilson, who was the architect of this and an alumni from this conference from last year. Adds about 15,000 working care slots, and raises the income eligibility to about $74,000 from about previously from $44,000. So it was significant investment in that, which is pretty critical because the cost of living in Washington State, especially Western Washington, has just gone through the roof. We're sort of a tech hub, and yeah, I can go into that in more detail if you want later. But so right now we're reaching 200% of the federal poverty level for a family of 3. But like I said, if you're, $74,000 in Seattle is not a ton. But we did manage to reduce the copay from about $700 down to about $115 for families. I think that's really significant. And that you qualify if you're either working or in school. And then under ECAP, which is the early learning childcare subsidy, we raised the eligibility from $24,000 to $44,000. And parents can be in school and not have to work anymore to qualify for this voucher. So it really allows parents to skill up. I think that's really critical. They can be going after a vocational degree, an associate's community college degree, or a certification. So that, to me, like if you're stuck in sort of low wage job and you have kids and you have a hard time taking care, you have a hard time going to school, this will help a lot with that. It does allow grants for childcare deserts. I think that's mostly capital costs. It's a one-time grant, it's not operations. Does expand home visitation, and it raises subsidies for ECAP to 85% of the market rate with a 10% rate increase. We just have a problem of private providers wanting to provide slots here because it's kind of a loss for them. So we're trying to address that. And then we've had a lot of, I think you would say, formalization of childcare and early learning in that we've, over the last, 10 years, required a lot of standards to be met, which can be a good thing, but it can also be a bit stifling. And so I think there's some discussion to be had there. There's some things to unwind and look at. But what we did in this bill is we allow for negotiated rulemaking. So it's not just the Department of Children, Youth, and Families who say this is how it's going to be in terms of the standards, but you can work it out, I think, with individual childcare providers. And those are the highlights. There's also a lot of other good stuff. It was a fairly party line vote. It was a party line vote in the Senate. All Democrats voted for it, all the Republicans voted against it, and there was few Republicans that voted for it in the House, some of the more moderate ones. I don't know why this was such a partisan issue, although it just had to do with, I think, about $275 million in investments. And a lot of that is federal money, but we do have a plan to transition to state money. So we have that commitment for ongoing operational expenses.
That is actually the portion that we most wanted to highlight. We are so excited about this, just in general. But Washington has done such a lovely job of building in that transition from using federal relief to make these improvements to moving to transitioning to other sources of revenue. It's a perfect model for other states moving forward. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
For that overview, and congratulations. It's
Thank
huge.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Senator Wilson asked all the co-sponsors to ask. So we get like budget requests, what do you call them, earmarks.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's usually $1 million or $2 million. You ask the budget chair. And our plan was to ask for $275 million for childcare to the budget chair. And to have enough of us do it to send a message to her that it should be prioritized. So we did that, and it worked.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
So
it helped to have been kind of flush with federal dollars and a better revenue stream than we thought we'd have. But yeah, I think we got it done.
Awesome. And you'll see here, we were just thinking of, you know, significant actions from other states in recent times around financing and funding early care and education. You know, some of these are increases in taxes, but significantly, some of these, like the examples from Florida and Colorado, involve folks having pursued state enabling legislation to allow for the creation of taxing districts, which I suppose is also a new tax, but regional taxing districts to fund early care and education at the local and regional level. And then significantly, you know, in November, we saw Multnomah, Oregon at the local level pass a really landmark personal income tax for wealthy earners to fund universal pre-K, which was pretty cool to see. But yeah, these are just some of the ways that we think about that we are, you know, tracking and you know, making never offering our we don't prescribe any way to go, but these are just options. And then I think somebody had their hand raised. Let's see. Yes.
Solomon, go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. I had a question on the funding piece of it. One of the things we've talked a little bit about in actually our county, in Montgomery County, right outside of DC, but sort of interesting if it's applicable statewide, is, you know, using some sort of I hate to use the word tax, but some sort of contribution from the business community, and specifically on businesses to sort of, you know, this is a benefit to their workforce, it draws people to the state. Do you have any models or examples of places around the country where they've used, I mean, again, maybe it is sort of an impact fee on, you know, corporations of a certain size, but, you know, they've gotten buy-in from the business communities in their state to say, or their community to say, this is a priority for us and we want you to chip in?
Yeah, there are lots of examples of places that have made those kinds of arrangements. They don't tend to generate a ton of additional investment, but every bit helps. And we can actually, so these are some of the common methods for generating new revenue. But when you're thinking about the more innovative methods, and I think this is what you were referring to, there are many ways that the business community can contribute, can get involved, and we can offer more specific examples, but the answer is yes, and you know, it's definitely to be encouraged.
And Kylie, I can follow up with you one-on-one, but thank you.
Absolutely, thank you for the question.
And Senator Solomon, did you have a question as well, or a follow-up?
Yeah, I just forgot to add. So some of the future funding mechanism is we passed a capital gains tax.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a 7%, around 7% of sale of stock or bonds after a profit of $250,000. So that's sort of the longer term anticipated funding mechanism for the childcare spending. There's going to be a court challenge because we're, at least right now, the constitutional interpretation by the Supreme Court from a 1932 case is that you cannot do a graduated income tax. And so they're going to challenge this under the notion that this is a graduated income tax. So we don't know how that's going to go, but I'm pretty optimistic that we'll keep that capital gains legislation that we passed.
Another bold move on Washington's part. It's fantastic. All right.
And I'll just say thank you, Rep. Neuron, for posting in the chat. Hopefully everyone sees what the representative just posted, how they did the work that Kylie was just talking about with universal pre-K. So that link is there, and we can also share that as follow-up information for those that might be interested.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I just want to reemphasize that we are available for future conversations across any of what we've talked about today, for sure.
Is that the official end of your slides?
Of our slides, yes. But if there's anything else you need from us, we are here in person.
Okay, perfect. Does anyone have anything else? I see the chat going, which sometimes is hard to read and keep up with at the same time. But does anyone want to unmute or keep putting things in the chat? Any particular questions or comments, ways that your state might be innovatively using some funds or ideas that you've heard sort of through colleagues? Hearing none.
I've got a question here, Allison. I'll chime in. And I don't want to put Kylie or anyone from CFP on the spot, but prior to all the federal money, something that we got questions about a lot at NCSL was around public-private partnerships and those forms of funding. And so I wonder if those conversations are still happening in states, if those are things you'd be interested in learning more about, if anyone has questions about those. I know Nebraska's model, where I think it's targeted towards infant and toddler services and programs. They have a public-private partnership there that's been in place for many years, but maybe that is sort of not in vogue anymore. I don't know. I guess that's just one sort of funding mechanism that we haven't touched on today, because I think so much of the focus is on the federal funds, and rightly so. So just want to throw that out there. If that's of interest, maybe we could talk about it, but if not, if it comes up in the future, we're happy to provide some more resources.
Well, yeah,
we actually just did a report for Nebraska on innovative financing strategies, and so included a lot of their early work in public and private space. And then there's a section on public funding as well. So we could probably send that around. Might be interesting.
And I did see a hand raised. You can go ahead and unmute yourself, Rep. Neuron, and share your question if you'd like.
Oh, it wasn't just, thank you. It wasn't necessarily a question. I was just thinking about ways that we're spending in Oregon right now. And we knew that we were not very well set up with our employment-related daycare program, serving people poorly. There was room for improvement. We did House Bill 3073, and that bill is actually going to set up a new department, which we're doing, I believe, largely with ARPA funds. And it's going to merge the Department of Human Services and the Early Learning Department. And we'll be having childcare in one space, where regulations and funding and training were in different spaces before. We looked a lot at and I don't know if we have anybody from New Mexico, but New Mexico is doing some really innovative things in this space too. But just wanted to throw out there that we knew that we would be able to set up a more strategic plan with ARPA dollars. So going forward, hopefully we can invest with a more seamless system. We were kind of all over the place before. So that could be just something that individuals might want to consider, is how fluid and how coordinated or siloed is the system in your state, and is this a big enough issue in your state where you might want to streamline with ARPA dollars. And I think that's kind of come up already in Kylie's presentation, but I just think that sets us up now for more strategic investments going forward, as we hope that the federal government will continue to invest in early childhood.
Yes, thank you. We are definitely looking to places like Oregon and New Mexico as real trailblazers, I think, in the ways that you mentioned. So yeah, continuing to track and stay aware of what is happening there is super important to us.
Well, Ritter, that sets up us nicely for tomorrow, because we will be talking about systems and governance a little bit more. You got a little bit of that in Thinkific about sort of how states are shifting programs, as you're saying, and what's the most strategic way. So we'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. And so let's go ahead, unless there's any last remaining questions or comments. Feel free to unmute or drop in the chat, but otherwise we'll go ahead and wrap things up, because I know you've already given us so much of your time. So we'd love to just hear a little bit, since we didn't get a share out from the small groups, if you don't mind sharing just one thing you plan to do with today's information. Allison's put the link in the chat, or you can hold your phone up to that QR code on your screen. I know we're sort of all at different places when it comes to I think we all said, most people said they weren't sure if there was a strategic plan in their state or not. So we'd just love to know sort of what's next for you. I'm gonna go ahead and...
Yeah, I heard lots of conversation this morning as well, even in our opening group, about funding and what do we do and how do I get that information? So I know it's definitely on people's minds.
Okay, Melissa, can you stop sharing so I can share mine? Got a few answers here. Great.
Okay, that was me. That's so cool.
The QR code.
Yeah.
You got it. You did it.
I mean, I want to do it in the future.
Yeah. Great. So it sounds like we've all got some homework to do, taking this this template back maybe to our states, regrouping with advocates, fiscal staff, and finding out if such a document maybe already exists, or how this new template might be useful to the conversations in your states. Finding out where the COVID dollars are, specific to pre-K funding, looking at cost models. And that document I shared when Kate was speaking earlier on, that had a lot of state examples. I don't know, CFP folks, how many state cost models you've done, but it's quite a few, maybe a couple of years old, but it sounds like there are lots of examples already. Legislators on the line could think about looking at as an example.
There are lots of examples, and that document also has some online tools if you want to do kind of just a quick and dirty analysis of cost of something in your program. It's not super, they're not super specific to a goal, but at least it can give you a general idea.
Great. Well, let me stop there. Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like, even though we're all at different places, today's presentation and this template of the strategic financial plan has been helpful. Again, please reach out to us easy step as you get further into this work. Melissa, do we have any last final things?
Yep, that's the last slide up there.
Okay, so tomorrow we're going to take this funding conversation and now put it in context of systems, just as Ripner was saying, is how do you position yourself strategically to make use of all these funds and to think about children and families holistically. And so we'll hear from the National Director of the PM3 Center here in the University of Colorado, Denver. Some best practices from her, from Christy Cowers. That we'll also hear from Commissioner Beth Bai, who was going to join us. You might remember she was going to join us in July. It turns out she was speaking at another fellows program at the same time and their calendar got a little mixed up knowing that there was 2 fellows speaking engagements. So she is going to join us tomorrow and share some of the innovations from Connecticut. She, I think I mentioned last month, has the unique perspective of being a childcare provider and then a legislator, and was a member of the very first class of early learning fellows, and now is at the executive branch, as a commissioner. And so I think she's got a lot of great advice, lessons learned, things to share that they're doing in Connecticut. We'll also get into a little bit more action planning, putting pen to paper, thinking through sort of next steps as you move into your new chapter as an alumni of this program. So join us tomorrow, same time, same place, same link. And we're excited to wrap things up with all of you. Thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your thoughts and your questions and being attentive. We know this is a lot. So thanks very much. If anyone has any last questions, we're happy to stay on for a few more minutes. But thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow.